Welcome friends to this course on thermomechanical processing and thermochemical processing, and this will I hope will help you in understanding the whole thermomechanical and thermochemical processing which is used in the industry. If you look at typical material processing stages, okay, usually if you are doing any bulk processing, usually you start with a melt route, that means you will do a ingot casting. Okay. So, these are big ingots, okay, in which you have to pour molten metal, whichever material we are working with, aluminum, steel, whatever, okay, and then you allow it to cast, okay, and then this solid material will be processed further. Okay. For example, there can be a hot rolling process, okay, where initial processing will be what we will call as roughing, okay, and in that you will be supplying, or you will be imposing higher strain in the material, okay, and this will be done at higher temperature obviously. And then you go further to what we call as finishing processes, that is there you apply lower strain, and usually finishing operations are done at lower temperatures, so that you can get good surface finish, and also the dimensional tolerance will be much better. Okay. And the last one, as I was telling you, that it can be cold rolling, and there are some pictures here just to give you an idea of the scale in which the industry work, okay, because in the laboratory it will be a very small scale rolling mill and so on. Okay. So, these are rolling mills, and you can see that these are continuous rolls are there. So, the strain will be imposed in multiple stages in the material. You do not want to impose very high strain in one go. Okay. Similarly, this is a process where the molten metal from this ladle is being poured into the ingots. Okay. So, again you can see the size, this is the size of a man standing there controlling the whole operation, and the size of the ladle and ingot, and similarly the size of the rolling mill. Okay. That gives you an idea of the scale in which industry works. So, it is always a challenge to do experiments in the laboratory scale and kind of implement them where the processing will be done in a bulk condition, and control of temperature, strain and strain rate will not be that precise. Okay. And to that we want to give some suggestion that if the processing will be done like this, it will be you will get better properties, better microstructure and so on. So, actually why we do thermomechanical processing? Okay. The thermochemical part will be introduced to you by Professor Sairam Meka when his lectures will start after the lectures on thermomechanical processing will be over after 30 lectures. So, before his lectures will start, he will give you a brief introduction. Okay. So, I am taking right now the thermomechanical processing introduction right now. And the objective of thermomechanical processing is first is to break the cast dendritic structure. Okay. So, when you do any casting process, okay, usually the microstructure which you get is what you can see in this micrograph here. Okay. So, these are called dendrites. Okay. So, dendrite is a tree like structure. Okay. And you can see that there is for example a central branch here, then there are secondary branches coming out of it. Okay. At different places you can see a main branch is going, and then there are secondary branches, sometimes there will be tertiary branches and so on. Okay. So, this is a typical dendritic structure, and as you can see, because of the etching effect, you can see that this look different color, and you can see between two dendritic structure there is some different contrast is there. Okay. So, usually this is the dendrite has lower solute content, and between two dendrites we call it as an interdendritic region. It contains more solute. Okay. So, or lot of intermetallics form in this region. Okay. So, the dendrite will be relatively solute poor, okay, and the interdendritic region will have more solute content. Okay. So, this structure is not good for mechanical properties. I will show you in the next couple of slides. Okay. So, the first objective is to break the cast dendritic structure. The second objective is when you are breaking this cast dendritic structure, we want to also refine the microstructure. Okay. So, you can see these dendrites sometimes are very big in size. Okay. So, we want to reduce the size of the dendrite, first break it and then we want to refine the microstructure. Okay. So, that is our second objective of thermomechanical processing, to refine the microstructure, and also a very important objective gaining lot of importance nowadays is to control the crystallographic texture. So, we will see what do we mean by crystallographic texture, okay, and that is that also controls mechanical property to a great extent. Okay. A good choice of texture will give you much better properties. So, what is the problem with cast structure? Okay. So, they have dendritic structure and as I told you they have lower solute content, and interdendritic structure have higher solute content, and usually intermetallic phases will be there which are brittle in nature. Okay. So, you can see this is a S cast structure of AZ91 alloy, okay, and the dendrites are relatively solute poor, okay, where the interdendritic region, this is the interdendritic region and this is my dendrites. Okay. They are solute poor. If you do a solutionizing, that means if you allow you take this material to high temperature, keep it for sufficient amount of time, then what will happen, this solute, because there is a segregation of solute, solute is having different composition at different places, there will be diffusion. Okay. And slowly if you see that the solute is now diffusing and the thickness of this layer, if you see in the solutionized material has reduced considerably. Okay. So, now it has reduced considerably and the continuous network of interdendritic region, as you can see, these are all continuous, okay, without any break, that is now breaking. So, you have a lot of places where there is break in the interdendritic region. So, the first process for any cast structure is to redistribute the solute, okay, and have a uniform, more or less uniform or homogenized composition throughout the material. So, that is the first thing, okay, but still you have that dendritic structure there, okay, only the solute content is distributed. Okay. So, the next one is to break this dendritic structure, that is what is the objective of thermomechanical processing. Okay. So, if you look at the mechanical properties of the cast structure, as I told you, these are not very good, okay, strength and ductility will both will be very low. Okay. And the reason is that cast structure contains porosities and cavities, okay, and also as I told you about dendritic region, and any crack can easily initiate on these porosities and cavities, okay, and once it nucleates, it can easily propagate through interdendritic region. Okay. So, as I told you, there is an interdendritic region which contains intermetallic particles, has a continuous first thing is has a continuous structure and they are also brittle. So, once a crack is initiated, as you can see, this crack is going through this interdendritic region in a very nice fashion. Okay. You can see that this crack is growing through the interdendritic region, it is separating two dendrites. Okay. And also as you can see in this micrograph that cast structure contains large number of cavities and porosities, okay, which can act as a nucleation site, and once it nucleates, it can the crack can easily propagate through the interdendritic region. Okay. So, because of this, the cast structure is always not considered a good choice for mechanical properties. Okay. However, in some cases where you cannot have any other way of fabricating a component, you use cast structures, but then you have to ensure that there are not very high stresses applied on the component. Okay, it is relatively kind of stress free, only the component is there just to because you do not have any other fabrication method to make that kind of component. The other reason to do thermomechanical processing is grain refinement. Okay, and why we want to do grain refinement or microstructure refinement is to increase the strength. Okay, and how the strength increase? Because of the Hall Page relationship, okay, which says that the stress will be dependent on the grain size to the power halves, and the grain size is in the denominator. Okay. So, that means if grain size is you reduce the grain size, okay, the flow stress will increase. Okay. And you can see that effect here in the micrograph. So, on the x axis you have d to the power minus half is plotted, okay, and on the y axis we have stress, and you can see as we are increasing d to the power minus half, okay, that means we are decreasing the grain size, the yield stress of the material is increasing. Okay. So, this is the effect of grain size reduction. Okay. So, that is always what we like to have. How I can do the grain refinement? Now, as I told you, we want to do thermomechanical processing. So, this is the effect of thermomechanical processing on the grain size. Okay. So, basically when you are doing thermomechanical processing, you are controlling strain rate and temperature and of course, strain also. So, when you are deforming at higher temperatures, okay, and lower strain rate, then the grain size will be high or it will be more. Okay. And both this effect can be easily captured by a parameter called Zener-Holloman parameter, okay, which has both temperature and strain rate. So, this is strain rate and this temperature. Okay. So, when the strain rate is you are reducing, okay, and because temperature is in the denominator and as I also it is within the exponential. So, effect is exponential here of temperature. So, if you are increasing the temperature and reducing the strain rate, then the Z will reduce. Okay. If you are increasing the strain rate and reducing the temperature, okay, the Z will be more. Okay. So, higher strain rate, lower temperature will promote lower grain size, as you can see in this micrograph, in this graph, where on x axis ln of Z is plotted and on y axis the grain size is plotted, ln of grain size is plotted. You can see as the Z is increasing, okay, as Z is increasing, okay, my grain size is reducing. So, that is the effect of thermomechanical processing, that control of temperature, strain rate and of course, strain also. Okay. So, control of temperature and strain rate to refine the microstructure. So, if I do processing at lower temperature and higher strain rates, I will be able to get finer grain microstructure. Of course, there are other effects also we have to consider, whether if we are in doing this, whether we are introducing any defect in the material, then it makes no sense just to refine the microstructure if there are defects in the material, because the defects will bring down the strength and ductility both. Okay. The other part is, as I told you, about controlling texture, and the effect of that is shown here. Okay. You can see there are two cups which are drawn. Okay. So, you have a die and a punch. Okay. Punch is forcing the material to deform. Okay. So, in one case you can see a very nice cup is formed, okay, with a uniform surface on or uniform top, okay, whereas in this case you can see there is a formation of what we call it as ear. Okay. It is like our ear, okay, and the problem with this is that because of this formation of ear, you have more thinning in these regions, okay, wherever the ear is formed, than these regions. So, this is thickness is lower and in this part thickness is more. Also, when you want to use it, you have to remove this much amount of material from the cup. Okay. So, this will go as waste, and so ideally we want forming like this, okay. And the use of these is basically, you can see that nowadays the cold drinks which you get in aluminum cans, okay, you can see that this kind of deep drawing, okay, a very large drawing formability you need in a material where you want to have this size of the can, okay. So, you can't afford to have ear formation, okay, and that can be reduced by having the or by controlling the texture. We will see the details of texture when we will discuss that, okay. But right now you just take it from me that texture is basically the orientation of the unit cells are there in each grain, okay. So, how these unit cells are oriented? If they are oriented randomly, okay, you will see a random texture, you can see the points all over the place, okay. Whereas, in this case all the cubes or all the unit cells are oriented in one particular fashion, and that is why you can see a very strong texture in this material. So, by controlling this particular orientation of unit cell within each grain, okay, of course, you have to do processing for that, then you will be able to have a forming which is desirable, okay. So, now just to look at what are the different thermomechanical processes are there, okay. I have divided these thermomechanical processes in two categories. One what we call as conventional thermomechanical processing, which is based on compressive strains, okay. That means, when you want to deform the material or change or impose the strain or change the cross sectional area, okay, you are doing it under compression, okay. And for example, our conventional processing like forging, rolling and extrusion comes in this category. There is another category which is now what we call as non-conventional thermomechanical processing, or a more popular name is severe plastic deformation, SPD processes. These are based on shear strain. So, the deformation or the strain is imposed in under shear condition, okay. So, all your this equal channel angular pressing or accumulated roll bonding, of course, is through rolling compression basis, but lot of shear strain actually are induced in the material, and which actually helps in bonding as well as grain refinement. High pressure torsion, multi-axial forging is of course based on compression method, that is why I have colored it in a different way. Then you have friction stir processing and so on, okay. So, all these processes are based on shear strain idea, and that is why you are able to impose more strain in one cycle in these processes as compared to compression based deformation processes. So, basically, as I told you the scale in the first slide, okay. So, we want to give suggestion to industry based on what we are doing in the lab, okay. So, basically we are trying to physically simulate the process in the lab, okay. So, if it is a compression based process, then we will do a simple compression test, okay, at different strain rate, temperature and so on for different strain levels, okay, to find out that what is the change in the flow stress or any change in the microstructure, or and then we have to implement these results in the industry, okay. So, and if you are doing any SPD based process, then we will try to simulate that using some torsion experiment, okay, where we are applying the shear strain in the material, okay. So, these type of physical simulations are usually done in laboratory to implement the solution in the industry, okay. And the output when you do this simulation is basically in terms of flow stress curves, okay. So, as you can see, there are two flow stress curves shown here at two different temperatures the deformation was carried out, okay, and the strain rates are shown here, okay. So, strain rate is increasing in this direction. So, two different temperatures at different strain rates you get flow stress curves, okay. And through that we kind of try to understand that what are the mechanism involved during the deformation process, okay. So, for example, if there is any strain hardening, then we know that there is dislocation, multiplication or grain growth is taking place, or if there is any strain softening as a function of strain, if the flow stress is coming down, then we know that dislocation annihilation is there through recovery process, or recrystallization is taking place. Okay. Or if any steady state is there, then you know dynamic recovery or basically generation and annihilations have balanced each other. Okay. So, that is the steady state condition. So, all these type of flow stress curves you can see when you are doing this kind of deformation, and then we use this output to get what we call as constitutive equations. Okay. So, basically constitutive equation is the relation between the stress, strain rate and temperature. Okay. So, we established the constitutive equation for each material, that what is the response of material in terms of stress, okay, as a function of strain rate and temperature. So, that helps us to develop some equations, okay, and this equation then can be used to kind of model the process. Okay. So, once you have this data constitutive equation, you can use this data to model, for example, forging, extrusion or rolling process. Okay. You can use FEM model, and then in FEM model you will need that to know that what is the constitutive relation this material follows. Okay. That is how the model will be able to calculate that what will be the strain or strain rate at different location, okay, and flow stress. So, you can divide the whole thermomechanical processing based on strain rate in different segments. Okay. So, you have creep at very low strain rates. Okay. So, strain rate in this direction your strain rate is going down, and in this direction strain rate is increasing. So, you have creep, then superplasticity, then conventional thermomechanical processing, then you have ballistic kind of deformation, very high strain rate. Okay. So, there are different ranges of strain rate here, okay, and that defines different type of processes which you can model, or which you can create a constitutive equation for these different deformation conditions. Okay. So, this is the constitutive equation, a simple type, one of the types, okay, which is what we try to develop, okay, to then predict that what will be the response of the material as a function of strain rate and temperature. And another thing we try to do through these laboratory experiments, okay, is what we call as development of processing map. Okay. So, why we want to do that is for an engineer who is practicing or who is in the industry looking after the processes, okay, for him knowing all this condition, stress, strain rate, it does not make sense. Okay. He wants a very clear instruction that what will be the window within which he can process the material. So, what temperature he should keep, okay, or he should heat the ingot before deformation, what amount of strain he has to give, and what will be the velocity of deformation process, that means what will be the strain rate window for him. So, if we can get a window like that, okay, where we can get a defect free material, okay, and also which gives you a refinement in the grain size, that means it should have a recrystallization zone condition at that particular window, then that is the window ideally we would like to give it to the industry or to the process engineer. Okay. And to know that, okay, we have to develop using all this output of stress, strain rate, output of stress as a function of strain, strain rate and temperature. Okay, we developed what we call as processing map. Okay. So, you can see on the x axis it has temperature, y axis it has strain rate, okay, and some contours are shown here. Okay. We will discuss this later on when we will discuss about processing map. Okay. Just to give you an idea that basically we are looking for the regions which gives you higher efficiency. So, this efficiency translate into the microstructural changes in the material. Okay. So, we look for all these high efficiency zones. okay, and this will give you an idea that okay, this kind of window if I work in, okay, that will give me the defect free microstructure, okay, and I want to avoid all this region which is showing with hatching, okay, a gray area, this I want to avoid, and I want to do the processing in the high efficiency region. Okay. So, in this particular course basically what we are going to do, we are going to understand all this, how to develop constitutive equation, how to develop processing map and understanding of texture, okay, and what are the different processes. Okay. So, that when we do laboratory experiments we should be able to translate those result into industry, okay, and development of all this will be carried out as modules. Okay. So, one module will be on constitutive equation, one module will be on processing map, one module will be on understanding of crystallographic texture and so on. Okay. So, overall that will be able to help you in implementing the laboratory experiments to the industry. Okay. So, with that I would want to thank you for the attention to this particular lecture, okay, and I hope that you will be able to get benefit out of this particular course, okay, for your coursework as well as if you want to go in industry, or if any engineer who is already practicing engineer, okay, I hope he should be able to get some benefit out of this particular course. Thank you.